From politics and conflicts to what climate change and ungoverned AI mean for our world, we'll unpack it now with Ian Bremmer. He's president and founder of Eurasia Group and G0 Media, and he joins us from New York. Ian, thank you very much for joining us on the show. If you had asked me, I would have said climate change, I would have said China-US tensions, but you say it's the US versus itself as the top risk for this year. Now, what exactly is happening in the US right now that makes it the top risk of 2024, Ian?
Thank you, and happy to be with you. And indeed, China-US tensions we consider to be a red herring for 2024. In other words, it's going to be more managed than decline, and that's one of the few bright spots in the report. Not the way it frequently feels from Singapore, I understand very clearly. But the U.S., of course, does remain the most powerful country in the world. Its economy is doing quite well, rebounding post-COVID. Its military is the only one that can project itself globally. But its political system is in crisis. It is by far the most dysfunctional political system of all of the advanced industrial economies. It is not capable of ensuring a free and fair election that transfers power peacefully and that is believed as legitimate by its population. And that is deeply challenging, not just for the domestic political environment for the United States, but for all the countries around the world that rely on the United States for the commitments of its power in upholding a global trade system and maintaining a level of global stability. All of this and more makes it almost impossible not to list the United States as the most impactful political risk for 2024.
Okay, so the report describes our world right now as G0, meaning there's no global leadership. And that implies, Ian, that the U.S. has stopped trying to fill this traditional role. Why is that?
Well, there are a number of reasons. I think a lot is because so many Americans feel that their political leaders are not taking care of them. Some of that is growing inequality. Some of that is identity politics. Some of that, perhaps a deeper part, is the erosion of the traditional institutions that help to raise American young people into civic-minded adults. The nurture that comes in addition to nature as people grow. Whether that is the family, which is atomized, or religious institutions and churches, which are much weaker and have much lower attendance and are much less trusted. It's your local Little League and other civic institutions in the United States. And they've increasingly been replaced by algorithms, by people that have had their relationships, their social fabric intermediated by digital platforms that treat them as consumers and products, but not as individuals. And I think that if you had to focus on any one thing that really is behind the unraveling and the erosion of U.S. political institutions and democracy, I think that is what I would focus on, the replacement of nurture with algorithm.
Ian, number 2 on your list, right after the U.S. versus itself, is Israel-Hamas and the broader Middle East. But isn't it also true that the various major players, have successfully kept the fighting contained so far? And isn't it also true that, a regional war is not going to benefit anyone, including, I suppose, players like Iran?
The Russian revolutionary Trotsky once said that you may not want war, but war may want you. And in this case, there are so many avenues for escalation, and it is much harder to imagine being smart enough and lucky enough to contain the existing fighting 3 months in now to the territory of Gaza than to see it escalate. There are many ways it can escalate. One is the likelihood of opening a second front with Hezbollah. That fighting has been expanding over the past days, both in terms of skirmishing across the border, as well as the Israeli assassination of a major Hamas leader in Beirut. Harder for Hezbollah to sit on its hands and not respond to that. There's also, more broadly, the growing fight against the Houthis that the Americans have tried to deter through economic measures against third parties, by building a multilateral coalition militarily, and by engaging in limited strikes. So far, that has not worked. and it becomes more likely the Americans would strike Houthi bases in Yemen itself. That would expand the war significantly, make it harder to keep the Iranians out. Finally, you've got Shia extremist proxies of Iran in Syria and Iraq that are engaging in larger scale strikes against U.S. forces in the region. As servicemen and women have casualties, the likelihood the Americans will respond in escalatory fashion is growing. In addition to all of that, we have, of course, the extremism, the radicalization of millions of Muslims in the region and more broadly as a consequence of this ongoing war. And the likelihood that some of them will turn violent through organized terrorist groups or through lone wolf attacks in the region, as well as in the United States and Europe, is also growing. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know which of these is going to explode exactly when, but the likelihood that they will see substantial escalation over the coming months is far greater than the ability of the United States and other countries around the world to contain the fighting as it has been over the past 3 months.
Okay, the Russia-Ukraine war, it's being overshadowed by other conflicts around the world. It's become a lower policy priority for the U.S. as well. How likely are Kyiv and Moscow to take greater military risks in this type of environment?
It's certainly the strategic advantage for Putin so far has been willingness to take pain over a long period of time and wait out the Americans and other actors, believing that they will grow tired. They won't want to spend the money. They won't want to send the military support. And that does indeed appear to be playing out. Biden's policy of leadership to provide a support from NATO as well as from allies in Asia for the Ukrainians was very effective in the first year of the war, reasonably effective in the second year, increasingly divided and much less effective as we enter the war's third year. And we name this risk as a partitioned Ukraine. That, in other words, Ukraine will be divided in two. I don't want that to happen. I want to be very clear. I think it is just for the Ukrainians to be able to take their territory back, but they're not going to be able to. And as that occurs, especially a much smaller Ukrainian army whose new recruits are in their 40s as of today, as opposed to 26 when the war started, becoming much harder for them to fight, much harder for them to defend their remaining territory. And that's even assuming they get the same level of military support in the coming years that they've had in the first two, which looks increasingly unlikely. And so, yes, I do believe that President Zelensky and the military forces in Ukraine are likely to become more desperate and take greater risks as it becomes increasingly likely that their support from the United States is drying up.
Ian, I want to pick up on Russia a bit more now. It's one of the three countries you've named in the axis of rogues, the others being North Korea as well as Iran. Can I ask you what unites them and what makes them so dangerous to the world in 2024?
Well, they're all led by men, dictatorships that are 5'7", and that's very unusual. It has nothing to do, of course, with what unites them. It just amuses me as a fact. But the fact is that these are three countries that are seen as illegitimate on the global stage, and advanced industrial democracies refuse to work with them, refuse to trade with them, don't have diplomatic relations with them. And as a consequence of that, they sort of have nothing to lose. They're willing to act as chaos players on the international stage, undermining the international order, and they're cooperating. And we see that with North Korea providing immense amounts of ammunition and artillery to the Russians, the Iranians working to build an industrial complex for drone production inside Russia, and the Russians providing advanced technologies and commodities to those countries in response. That is the strongest coalition of rogue agents that the world has seen in modern times. Now, I want to be clear, China is not a member of this group, despite being seen as an adversary by my own United States and many other countries around the world. The Chinese are not chaos actors. They recognize that they need a functional global order for themselves to be successful over time. And as I said before, indeed, U.S.-China relations look like they should be more stable in 2024 than they have been over the last 3 years.
Okay, so leading to my next question, what about Taiwan? It's seen by some as the most dangerous flashpoint in the rivalry between the U.S. and China.
Well, we on the back of the axis of rogues, we also talked about three leaders on the global stage that are close friends of the United States: Zelensky in Ukraine, and Netanyahu in Israel, and William Lai in Taiwan, who's vice president, not president, but he looks a little bit more likely than not to win in Taiwanese elections next week. And in each of these three states, you have leaders that, for both personal and for national reasons, are likely to take bigger risks and pose bigger problems on the global stage than the United States, their principal ally, would want them to take. And so you're absolutely right to focus on the Taiwanese elections and on Lai specifically and his DPP party as a potential to upset what otherwise we are saying is likely to be a reasonably well-managed year for U.S.-China relations, the most impactful geopolitical relationship in the world. I'm a little less concerned about it, in part because there's a 50-50 chance that he loses. And if the Kuomintang comes in, then cross-state relations will have a bit of a honeymoon and will be more stable. Also, if he wins, there will be a strong effort by the Americans and Chinese to manage the outcome. We do have a range of military-to-military relations in the U.S., high and low level, that have just been restarted, which will help to contain unexpected military escalation from either side in the aftermath of such an election. Also, for the last 50 years, the United States and China know a lot more about each other's red lines on Taiwan than they do on other issues where there's conflictation. So, for example, on semiconductor export from the United States and those controls, or on the South China Sea. And so I do think, despite the fact that those relations could well get chippy in the coming months, that they won't lead to a new crisis.
Ian, glad you mentioned chips, because AI makes your list of top risks for 2024 as well. I want to ask you about the point you made about governing AI. You believe it's less about the laws and more about understanding the business models that drive, that's driving its expansion right now. The question I have for you is, are there no existing lessons, from landscapes right now, including social media? And I guess the basic, if you like, driver would be greed, capitalism, whatever you want to call it.
There should be lessons from social media, because social media has been basically ungoverned, and it has led to great damage, particularly to the world's democracies. It has shifted the American political model from being the greatest exporter of democracy in 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, to the greatest exporter of tools that destroy democracy unintentionally through social media, which has not just led to January 6th in the US, but January 8th in Brazil, and trucker strikes in Ottawa, and all sorts of populism that have been supported and become increasingly violent in democracies around the world. The United States and social media and the business models driving that, very profitable business models, but at the expense of human-to-human relations, who are treated as products to be addicted to these platforms. It's particularly disturbing when it comes to kids. Now, as we have a new technology like AI, which will do incredible things for the global economy, driving human capital and productivity, I'm an enthusiast, but the negative externalities that come from AI business models, some of which will be indifferent to the implications of testing these models real time on human beings and on our children. I mean, you have a pandemic, you test the vaccine before you roll it out to the people. You have a new GMO, genetically modified food, and you test it before you make it legal. And yet we take these algorithms for artificial intelligence and we test them, we roll them out real time on human beings across the planet. That is no way to run a business. It's certainly no way to run a country. And the technology is moving a lot faster than the ability to govern. And this will lead to bigger risks when those technologies, especially, are in the hands of businesses, of countries, and of individuals that are less concerned, perhaps, for the well-being of the citizens.
So many interesting points in this report. I wish we had more time. We'll leave it there for now. Thanks for unpacking it for us, Ian. That is Ian Bremmer, the president and founder of Eurasia Group and G0 Media.